You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello everybody. I'm Eric Vansel,
I'm Daryl Sanders.
and we're your hosts for this show that is not actually live. That's right. You are watching a pre-recorded episode, but we still got the chats on because obviously this is a YouTube premiere, and one, maybe both of us might actually be in here chatting. I think I might actually have some time to where I can come in and chat with the show. So that should be a lot of fun. I always like it when I can at least, even if we can't do the show live, I always like it when I can at least chat with everybody. Because then it kind of feels, especially if we're both in there, it actually feels kind of like it's a normal show. But yeah, this one I know you sent me this one. And it's kind of interesting because I'm curious on what this thing is based on, because they're talking about possibly bringing a new villain, which of course I'm acutely familiar with due to the fact that I've read all the recent Thrawn books. But why don't you go ahead and, set us up for this thing? Since obviously it was, you're the one that brought it up. You should be the one to read us in, if you will.
So pretty much today's episode, we're kind of talking about the new villain that's attached to the Grand Admiral Thrawn, and that being that of the Grisk. The Grisk has been kind of cited as somewhat of a more newish villain that may be on the horizon for Star Wars. And the reason why this is kind of relevant is there has been some Eric is very familiar with the Thrawn Ascendancy books he's read. Is it all of them or maybe two of them?
I've read one of them.
Okay,
I read the first one. I have the other two. I just haven't read them yet. I got to do that.
Okay, that's what it was. I knew you was something like that. So you have them, you just haven't read them all. Got it.
Right.
But there's a comic series out now where there's actually like this whole thing with Thrawn and Vader, and this is giving an account of when Vader was kind of more like in the infancy, so to speak. This is after Revenge of the Sith, but before Episode 4, and they're kind of having this conversation, and they're talking about, and Thrawn brings up the Grisk because Palpatine is feeling this force presence from the unknown regions. He doesn't know exactly what it is, but it's like this, dark presence that's coming from that, emanating from that area. I think he kind of prizes Vader about it. So Vader's kind of asking Thrawn, like, well, you're from that area. What the heck is a Grisk? And so Thrawn is kind of giving him the information of what a Grisk is, considering that they're kind of like the enemy to his species, the Chiss. So you have the Chiss and the Grisk. So
yeah, say that 3 times fast, right?
I know, right? So that's kind of the setup of all of this. This is where this conversation is hinged. And because of shows like Ahsoka, where we're now starting to explore the unknown regions, could the Grisk actually be coming in? Because the Grisk actually became a threat to not only just to Thrawn, but also to Palpatine too, as far as his whole empire thing. And that was the whole reason why, he wanted to find out what the heck is going on out there, because he wants to be prepared, because we all know Palpatine is all about maintaining his power. And so that could also lead to, current times right now, where we're watching the show Ahsoka, and we've been out in the unknown regions to find Ezra and things like that. So the Grisk could be coming. And if so, do you think we will see that in live action Star Wars? Do you think that's a direction we should go in? Because we've often talked about, we need to move past the Skywalker saga. We need to move into different directions where we need to see different villains. Not going backwards, it's a little bit easier because there's content that's been created in sense of the High Republic that has its own villains and things like that. But now, with the Grisk, that's a little bit closer to um, the modern canon that we're all more or less familiar with. So Could they be coming? Should they be coming? And what do you think that would do for Star Wars?
Well, this was actually brought up when we did our whole should the Yuuzhan Vong come in? You know, when we
Hmm.
did that whole show, that one was a really popular show too. Well, I promoted
Yeah.
it, but I mean, it was popular even with before I promoted it. But the interesting thing about that is some of the people that were chatting on that, and maybe no doubt, for all we know, right now they're chatting about it too, is the fact that the Grisk was sort of like the next logical step, right? Because the thing
Hmm.
is that the Yuuzhan Vong, as cool as they are, they're they're really like over the top, kind of like how the old expanded universe was. And
Hmm.
even though they technically could bring them in, and if you guys check that show out, you'll see we outline how they could actually bring them in, even into the current canon. Because remember, this is something that was done in this 22 book arc that was in the old expanded universe. And, you know, it just, by the time the thing was over, the universe was not even really recognizable. In fact, our authors had a really hard time trying to figure out what to do. Like, well, what stories do we do? The whole universe has just been blown to crap at this point. I mean, we don't, like, none of the familiar, you can't pick up and go, oh, well, you know, let's just talk about this thing maybe that's happening on Cloud City or something. There is no Cloud City. I mean, it's just, everything is just so out there that, you know, it just was really difficult. And the Grisk, they're kind of like the Yuuzhan Vong light. You know, they do share some of the same characteristics, but they're a
Hmm.
little bit more grounded. They're a little bit less over the top. They're probably arguably easier to bring in. And in addition to, of course, the Thrawn Ascendancy books, I want to say they were mentioned in probably the new Thrawn trilogy. That I did read. Because I remember when I read the first Thrawn Ascendancy book, I remember familiarity when I saw their name. And of course, they went into it a little bit. And so I thought, okay, you know, this is sort of cool, right? Because they're starting to come up with these villain groups. Like the High Republic has the Nile, you know, now the Grisk is in sort of this time period.
Hmm.
And my opinion is that since they have brought Thrawn firmly into the post Return of the Jedi era, it might not be a bad idea to just maybe bring the Grisk in there as well. Because remember, we talked about that the future of Star Wars was probably with Thrawn
Hmm.
and his
Right.
storylines, you know, and
Yeah.
all that. So I don't know. I think that the Grisk could actually prove to be a formidable foe for Thrawn and, you know, his version of the Empire. Of course, a lot of that also depends on, well, how long is his empire going to last? Because we know the First Order has to come in soon. You know, was he the first guy that was sort of running things and then maybe Snoke took over? Was he working with Snoke for a while? I mean, there's still a lot of unanswered questions,
Hmm.
obviously, that they could do. But yeah, I mean, I think that the Grisk is actually a really, really good way, a really solid way, honestly, of bringing in another villain that's interesting we haven't seen before. It's only been in books, it's only been in a handful of books, but yet, much like with Thrawn with the expanded universe, there's enough of a fan base that would probably appreciate seeing this. And it's a way of bringing something fresh yet familiar without, okay, here's yet another Han Solo adventure or something, you know? So, yeah, that's what I think.
Hmm. So, and that's very good, because I think, you know, there has to be. I mean, we don't say, well, it has to be, but there's always somewhat of a force, no pun intended, that's um waging some sort of war against our heroes, right?
Right.
So, we've always kind of had, like, in the prequels, we find ourselves with the separatists. Those are kind of the group. And then we get to the original trilogy. You have the Empire, now the former Republic, now the Galactic Empire. So now you have the Empire versus the Rebellion. in the sequel trilogy, you have the First Order versus the new, basically, essentially the New Republic. So having another group, or to be at odds with, is that's what we would need. But let me ask you this: since you have a little bit more knowledge on the Grisk, what makes them so formidable, especially for someone like Thrawn and potential other future Jedi? Because we know the Yuuzhan Vong. We, for those who are very aware, and that's more my time, as far as time that I put into, I know more about the Yuuzhan Vong, as far as, like, the Force doesn't really affect them. It's a lot harder. They're so. But what's the Grisk's deal? Like, what's the deal with the Grisk?
Well,
what makes them so formidable?
They're basically, for a while they were underestimated. Again, it's been a minute since I read the first book. That's why it's going to be interesting when I pick it up with the second one. But they're brilliant tacticians. They're kind of like I said, they're very much Yuuzhan Vong light. They have a little bit of that biological weapon thing to them. They basically are somewhat of a match to Thrawn and the rest of the Chiss, right? Because a lot of times people were underestimating them because they were somewhat nomadic in just the way that their culture is. But they're definitely a lot more powerful than what the Chiss at first thought. That's actually somewhat what the Ascendancy was about. And of course, this takes place, I think it's like right around episode 2, I think, where the first book takes place, because they briefly run into Anakin and I think they ran into Padme too. And there was like a little bit of an adventure between Thrawn, Padme, and Anakin. And this, of course, was before Thrawn came to the Empire, right? Because obviously it was after episode 3 that they found Thrawn, and that's where Timothy Zahn's latest books, well, not latest, but the new Thrawn trilogy. Latest in the sense that it wasn't the Thrawn trilogy that we all know and from 91. In that, and there's actually a comic, it's like a 6-part comic or something, that is essentially a comic version of the novel, and it pretty much visually goes through, okay, here's how the Empire found Thrawn. Thrawn eventually joins the ranks. He works his way up. On and on it goes. But that wasn't until, obviously, after the Empire took over. So after episode 3. But the Thrawn Ascendancy takes place like right around the time of episode 2. And so that's why it was interesting that Thrawn, because Thrawn, it's funny, he kept, when he was working with Vader, he knew it was Anakin. Like, he pretty much deduced that. And he would drop little hints here and there that made Vader go like, I really want to cut this guy down, but, I can't, because the Emperor pretty much wants him around. And yeah. And plus, it wouldn't have been easy because, again, Thrawn, I don't know if he would have actually been able to beat Vader, obviously, but he definitely, would have hurt him. So there's that. Of course, that's always up for debate too. There's a lot of, really fun Thrawn versus Anakin, Thrawn versus Vader, Thrawn versus, whoever. But yeah, that's why the Grisk, they basically had they had like some special armor and weapons too that I remember made them pretty powerful. Because I remember, even reading the book, I remember going, okay, these guys. Because the cool thing about at least book 1 of the Thrawn Ascendancy, I'm really curious on where it goes beyond, because you basically have, in the Chiss world itself, you have all these political factions, these families basically vying for control. And in the midst of this, the Grisk come in and they launch almost like these little terrorist attacks and stuff. And then, that pretty much upsets everything. So the Chiss are trying to battle their own internal conflicts while now having to deal with this external threat. And I think that that's one of the things that makes that so cool. And, at first they underestimated them. They dismissed them as just, pirates or something. But then they started realizing, no, there's like a plan. It kind of reminds me, it's going to be a very, very strange correlation, but it's
Okay.
similar to Deep Blue Sea in the sense
Yeah, that's a
of
strange. Didn't see that one coming at all.
yeah, well, that's because at first they're like, "Oh, these are just a bunch of dumb sharks or whatever." But then they start noticing
Uh,
like, "Oh wait, there's like coordination in their attacks here." There's and then of course that leads them to go, "Oh yeah, we injected them with this this serum that made their
yeah.
brains like bigger or whatever it was." And
My favorite lines was like, "We were screwing with the sharks, not the sharks are screwing with
yeah,
us."
yeah. And
That's
that's
still one
pretty
of my
much
favorite
it.
lines.
So where the correlation comes in is that they just dismiss them as pirates. They don't really see the subtleties of the attacks and how they're being maneuvered into this much, much more threatening situation. And Thrawn's the one that picks up on that. He picks up on it first. And
Mm.
so, that's part of what it is. Now, I remember hearing about this comic that you were talking about too, where, so now they're trying to bring the Empire Palpatine. So that means now they're coming back. I'm not sure. That's another reason why I'm looking forward to actually reading the second and third books, is because I wonder how far it actually goes. Like, I know the first book is taking place like around the time of episode 2, but I wonder if book 2, book 3, like how far into that era does it go? Does it go
Mhm.
in between 3 and 4 at this point? Does it kind of stay maybe between episodes 2 and 3? That's where the whole Clone Wars takes place, so it's possible. But there definitely, it looks like that Lucasfilm is like, no, these guys are cool. Let's bring them in. Or, it's probably not Lucasfilm. It's probably an author that had a really good idea. And Lucasfilm is just, I don't want to give them too much credit. But that's where I think that it's probably going. And now they're bringing the Empire into it. And, depending on how that goes, they can then maybe do the post Return of the Jedi world that the Mandoverse lives in, and they could just end up, somehow. And again, it'll be interesting to see what their fate is, what they do. There's all kinds of different things that can be done, but it is conceivable, at least so far. And again, if they're surviving in between episodes 3 and 4, I mean, unless Palpatine does something with them, which I doubt, then they could actually survive into around the Mandoverse time period. And who knows? Maybe they're going to be the big bad villain of the Mandoverse.
Yeah, I mean, or they could pop back up again for a raise thing, as well. That's what I'm wondering. As far as where do you feel like they belong? Um, I mean, we know, like you said, Eric, that they more or less arrived that we come to our knowledge in episode 2. Because that's when you said when the Throne Ascendancy books kind of start to unfold. However, um, majority of their time is spent between episodes 3 and 4, if I'm not mistaken. And so then now, we have the like you said, the Mandoverse, which is right after Return of the Jedi. They could pop up there because this is where Ahsoka is taking place right now, is in this time period, and we're dealing with Ron as far as in the, he's coming out of the unknown regions, and what's to say, hey, the grist, like, hey, we can find maybe a space, a hyperdrive lane or a hyperspace lane that where we can get out of here too, just like Thrawn and all these Purgle, and hey, we can get out here and see and what's going on, and maybe they become, like you said, the new villain, and they could be part of the reason why they're wiped out, and then now the First Order takes over.
Well, what's interesting about it is the fact that, besides the fact that these guys are fierce warriors, the other thing that I remember is the fact that there's like a gang of them, right? Like there's like an insane number, almost like a
Is it are they
locust.
so I was about to say, like, are they more like so in the Clone Wars, we would see like the separatist droids. Like that's how they were winning a lot of their battles, is because the sheer number of droids they had, just overwhelmed people.
Hmm.
And it's not even the fact that the droids were skilled. I mean, we all saw they were quite stupid and they were just kind of like almost, throwaway things. But the
Yeah,
fact that
cannon
it
fodder,
was,
basically.
yeah, but there's so many of them
Hmm.
that it's just like, okay, they'll just overrun you just by sheer numbers. So is that kind of how the grist work?
And kinda, and not to mention the Grist
Okay.
don't technically have a home either, right? So
Mm.
they kind of take over on they have their ships, and I mean it's almost like a Battlestar Galactica kind of situation. So they just go, they're almost like here comes a Star Trek reference. They're like the Borg in that sense. There's actually a lot of
Okay.
similarities there. Not so much in the fact that because they're not mechanical or anything like that, but I mean the fact that they're just an insane number of them. They're relentless, and they're very fierce warriors, and there's just like so many of them, and they just travel kind of in this floating colony or whatever. And again, this is just what I've been able to learn from the first book, and like I said, I think that they're mentioned in the Thrawn trilogy too. Um, but I don't remember there being any scenes or anything like that. I think it was a situation where they were just mentioned by name or something, and then it, kind of like a passing thing. Because, like I said, I remember when I read the Thrawn Ascendancy and we started dealing with them, I'm like, oh, yeah, these guys. So, yeah, it should be, I don't know, it should be actually pretty fascinating, depending on what they're going to do with them, because that's the other thing, too. When you bring in somebody like this, what are you going to do with them?
Yeah, because it like you said, the part of their deal is that they overwhelm me with just sheer numbers and force, in that regard. So it's kind of odd because you have a government, or yeah, I guess, yeah, a government that hasn't been solidified yet in the sequel trilogy. After the sequel trilogy, we're talking about post Rise of Skywalker. Um, and then you don't have really much of an established government really in the Mandoverse. They're trying to build one, and and that's the whole thing in the sequel trilogy from Force Awakens and everything like that. They're still kind of rebuilding this whole new republic type thing. So it seems like if the grist were to pop up at this time, or either one of those times, it would be almost like too easy for them, because there's you know you don't have a comparable foe. That, I guess that's the word I want to use. Like, you don't have an equal, because the Grisk are so vast, and then you have a and not only are they just massive, but they also are very tactical in the sense of tactical strategists and things of that nature. So
Well,
it's
there's
not like
more,
they're
though.
just
There's more. I
okay.
decided to punch them up because I knew that it's like I'm only remembering fragments. They also can enslave the minds and souls of beings. So they twist their
Wow.
desires, fears, memories, and hopes to their will to be their quote unquote clients. The Grisk ruled an empire known as the Grisk hegemony. So, yeah, like these guys are definitely crazy. So they
Well, that's
employ
what I'm.
client species, and that's another thing I remember, because I remember when I was reading the book, it was kind of like, wow, these guys are kind of like the Borg in that way, and that's very much what they do. They just assimilate, sort of,
Mhm.
these people, and then it's their, let's see, their war capabilities. Yeah, because if they fled, it would just be because they decided to leave the battle. They had a bunch of crazy powerful warships. They have a type of lightning gun, as well as a type of pellet gun, armor, helmets.
Mm-hmm.
Ritually, yeah, that's it. The weapons and armor were ritualistically disfigured on the right side. And that's, again, there's a little bit of Yuuzhan Vong in there, because like I said, if you look at them, there's some stuff. But yeah, just looking through, this thing on the Wikipedia. Yeah, there's a lot of things in there that I'd forgotten too. And a lot of it could be, maybe I haven't even gotten to it yet, right? I only had first out of 3 books. So, I don't know, maybe I'll make those the next ones, because I have had them for a while.
Are they like size wise? Like, are they huge? Are they imposing? Are they like because the Borg were very humanoid, like they're essentially just humans with these mechanical attachments or and appendages and whatnot. So are they more like that, or are
No,
they
they're like kind of an average height type of a thing. They're,
okay?
kind of like that image from the comic was pretty cool, because they gave a little bit of a of a sneak peek into what they actually look like, because obviously in a book, right, they're describing it, but
Hmm.
you're trying to get, I mean, unless you see him on a book cover, because that's what basically happened with Thrawn. We saw Thrawn on the cover of the book, so when they
Hmm.
started describing him, well, he's got blue skin and red eyes and all that, it's like, well, yeah, I get it. It's he's on the cover. Now I understand what he actually looks like.
Hmm.
But yeah, the Grisk, I don't remember if they were depicted or not, but I mean, they do a really good job of describing their look. But yeah, the comic, like you said, that they have actually shows them pretty well, and everything else. So they would definitely be something that's, now it's interesting, because if you go back to Thrawn's origin for the Empire, he was actually like running around on some planet when they found him, and I think, I don't remember if it was an Outer Rim thing or what, but I mean, it's almost like it's implied that it wouldn't really be difficult for them to go from the unknown regions to at least the Outer Rim, and then from there get into the core worlds. But it's
Hmm.
true, with the whole Ahsoka thing, it's kind of like, they made it sound like, oh, you got to go through this special hyperspace lane, and, it was almost like an Exegol level trip or something.
Right.
So I'm
Do
not
you think?
sure how they're going to
Mhm.
do that,
Yeah, I mean, do you think that this is? Should we just stick to Thrawn right now? Like, do you think Thrawn should be the big bad for a while, and then we just move to um, uh, the First Order? Are the grits something that would be cool, but do you think this would be better served in animation? Do you think this would be or versus live action?
Well, I mean, it depends on where they're going to go, right? I mean, obviously, I think it would be better served with animation, because a lot of the in between episode 3 and 4 programs have been animated. You know, I mean, I say
Hmm.
that like there's a lot of them. I mean, there's the Bad Batch, but I
You
actually,
have Bad Batch, Rebels. You have
yeah, Rebels is
uh,
the other one. But you also had Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan was a live action series that took place between the two. So I
mhm.
mean, you can make the argument either way. I think it would be easier probably to do that. I think it would really depend on what they wanted to do as far as what's their plan, film versus television show versus animated series. So live action versus animation on TV, or the actual films. One, where are they going to spend a lot of their time covering between 3 and 4? Because I think that you would probably want to show them. You could do one of two things. You could either show them there, which is more or less where they're placed, at least currently in canon, and then you can go from there, or maybe you just go, yeah, okay, look, the Grisk are back, But I definitely think that we need to see the end game of whatever this Thrawn storyline is before you start bringing them in.
Okay.
Because I think that right now, Thrawn is the main villain.
Yeah, good. And I'm glad you said that. I'm really glad that you brought that because I think that's a very valid point. Because we haven't really seen the full extent of Thrawn yet before you're bringing in this whole nother, new villain. So, I mean, and to some degree, you could use it as a foil for Thrawn in a way to kind of like, all right, well, now Thrawn has an enemy that he may need help with, as
which should
opposed to,
come probably a lot later, once
okay, yeah,
the storyline, whatever this current story arc is that they're working toward, which has technically spread across 2 different series now. Because remember, it was mentioned in The Mandalorian first, because Ahsoka was hunting him. And then, of course, that hunt continued in Ahsoka. And now, presumably, it's either going to wrap in either Ahsoka or another season of The Mandalorian. The other possibility, of course, is it could wrap in the Mandalorian movie. Whatever the case, though, I think that what they need to do is wrap whatever that storyline is, and then maybe you have a situation where they defeat Thrawn, but they don't kill him. He goes back to the unknown regions. Maybe the Grisk comes out, and maybe because Thrawn has the knowledge, maybe now the New Republic reaches out to Thrawn and say, hey, you gotta like help us out here. That could be interesting. And that's a way that they could do that whole the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe, the Grisk are attacking the Chiss, and, Thrawn's the one that reaches out for help from the New Republic. Because that's kind of what happened with the Yuuzhan Vong, was the fact that the Empire and the New Republic basically had this treaty where they gave the Empire this out-of-the-way region that they could control, and they just basically left each other alone. They just had an agreement that, you guys do your thing, we'll do ours, and,
like,
whatever.
Again, because make a Star Trek reference, you just can't cross the neutral zone.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of how it was. And, Pelion at that point, I think, was Grand Admiral. He was like the leader of everybody. And I remember that, a lot of the core world started falling, and then the New Republic came to the Empire, and the Empire's like, well, okay, we'll give you some weapons, we'll do all that, but I mean, to be honest, it's not our problem. You guys, that's on you. They're not messing with us. Well,
right.
Of course, Leia was basically
now,
saying, well, that's the thing. She was like, well, they're not messing with you now, but trust me, they will. And you need to help us now, or you're going to need our help later, and we might not be in the position. And of course, that's what ended up happening was then they were brought, the Empire got heavily attacked. And then, you had a bunch of people going, well, Palpatine were still here. This would be like an easy victory or something, which I thought was kind of hilarious because it made you think like, yeah, I wonder how that would have worked. But the thing that's interesting to me about the whole thing is that this, in a way, could mirror that. Where maybe, Thrawn goes back to the unknown regions and rejoins his Chiss brothers. And then maybe something happens and he needs to reach out to help for the New Republic or vice versa. They could do something like that. But no matter what they do, I think it has to tie up after, this current storyline.
So to basically summarize it is just like we need to figure out what the end of the Thrawn somewhat story is, and then we can decide if we're gonna. I won't say we as if we have control, but if they should, bring in like what, this would be a good time to bring in the Grisk for something, whether it's an animation or a film. So with what we've seen with Thrawn so far, in Ahsoka as far as live action, we last see him we've got these all these containers with, where the Dathomir, the Dath that why can't I talk? The Dathomir witches, the Night Sisters, essentially, have of course kind of like awakened all these dead bodies, and we're assuming that Thrawn is trying to create this army, with these with the undead, essentially. Um, which is going to be interesting because he's such a tactician. I wonder how much control he's going to have over all this. But, you know, if it comes down to it, maybe the Grisk are maybe that will be a little bit more of a formidable foe for the Grisk, because now you're trying to fight something that's not really dead. So I don't know. How do
Well,
you
I
think that would
think
work?
this is why I think that none of this is happening accidentally. We leave off where we see the zombie troopers and all that stuff. I honestly think
Hmm.
that that's part of Necromancer. I think that that's
Mm.
obviously it started out with, Palpatine, but I think that that technology is being used. And I think what you're seeing is that now Filoni's going back with this latest season of The Bad Batch, and he's giving us the origin of that, which is going to explain some things in the sequel trilogy, but it's also going to explain, I think, a little bit maybe about what's going on with Thrawn. Now, of course, could be way off base on this too. I mean, we don't know, but it does seem rather suspicious that we see these undead stormtroopers, and now all of a sudden, we go back to the Bad Batch, and it's like, oh yeah, it's Project Necromancer, and we're experimenting with
Hmm.
clones and all this stuff, and then of course further down, not only do you have Palpatine himself, but you also have the Sith troopers, and we don't know a whole lot about them either. We don't know,
Right.
are they guys that are in red armor? Are they force sensitive? Or some sort of like an acolyte type of thing? Are they undead? We don't really know a whole lot about them.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting one. I mean, like I said, I'm really curious as to see, because especially with the timeline, that's the part I think that's kind of throwing me, because you have the original timeline of Thrawn Ascendancy. I mean, yeah, I think it's Thrawn Ascendancy. It's You have that in episode 2. It starts off in 2, but then it's like we see Thrawn again in Ahsoka, which is post Return of the Jedi. Um, and so you're trying to bring these characters in at different points, and I'm just trying to figure out, like, what point are they gonna? What point does it serve the story best? I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Well, and
You know
that's
what I
the
mean?
problem, right? I mean, they have to figure out. This is why you need a roadmap of projects
Yeah,
going,
exactly.
like 5-10 years, because if you want to segregate the movies and the television shows, you have a little bit more leeway, because right now, what's our movie releases? They're like the beginning with Dawn of the
Yeah.
Jedi. You have possibly the Rogue Squadron movie coming back in line. You got the
Hmm.
Rey movie. Now, the one that probably cheats the closest is, of course, the Mandoverse movie. So that's what you have on that front. And it's like, well, where do you bring them in on that story? I mean, obviously, the Mandoverse movie, but again, I think it would be a mistake to do that unless that was a plan all along and they actually play a pivotal part. But if they don't, and you're just like, oh, let's just sandwich these guys in here. I think that, again, Thrawn is the main villain right now. Let that story conclude, and then you can do whatever you want. But if you're gonna bring somebody like the Grisk in, you don't want to one and done them. You don't want to use them in a cheesy way. You want to use them in such a way that it actually makes sense, and you want to use them in such a way that you can reuse them at a later time if necessary.
Yeah, I mean, all very valid points, and that's, um, that's where I'm at right now with all this. It's just, you know, we got to figure out what the story is, and like you said, the scope, because yeah, we're kind of bouncing all over the place, you know, as far as the films. We've got, you know, the Dawn of the Jedi, if that, you know, that's the working title. You know,
Right,
we've
we don't
got
even
that.
know.
Yeah, you know, we've got
Well, and
that.
actually,
You know, and then we still got this whole
yeah, what was the rumor title?
Ryan Johnson trilogy
Well,
that we
there's
still
that.
don't know. You know, I mean, that could be. I mean, you see what I'm saying? Like, we don't know if that factors into it at all. So, or what timeline that's going to be in. So, yeah, it's really kind of hard to say, you know, where all this kind of is going to fit in. But I think it's cool. I mean, I think, you know, to have a foe that Thrawn struggles with, because, you know, he's always been so calm, cool, and collected, but it seems like these guys are the ones that's kind of giving him a little bit of a run for his money, because they are as strategic and tactical as he is, but on top of that, they have the sheer numbers to overwhelm him as well. So I think to see Thrawn kind of have to battle that would be very interesting. But once
Well,
again,
that's why I always encourage people to read the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy. Of course, I'm going to finish it myself, but even the first book, I mean, you're captured right away. It's a prime example. In fact, when we did that show about, you know, what's the future of Star Wars, and we concluded that it was Thrawn. Part of the reason why I was saying that was because other than that little cameo with Anakin and Padme, there are no familiar characters. I mean, other than like Eli Vanto, who, you know, was introduced and became Thrawn's right hand guy, and Ilani or whatever, who's the other Chiss that we sort of know. But again, you would have had
mhm,
to have read the Thrawn trilogies to even know that. So the point is, basically, you have at least one book, if not the whole trilogy, but in the one book, there's no familiar characters, and yet it is probably one of the best Star Wars books that's been written. I
mhm,
mean, it has everything that everybody loves about Star Wars. Of course, it has the action, it has all that stuff, but it has all this political intrigue. I mean, if you know, I mean, everybody thought that Bloodline was good. This thing buries that because there's so many different. You know, it gets Games of Thrones ish. That's
hmm,
sort of how the like all the factions and the families and all that stuff works. I mean, it's
mhm,
really a extremely well written, well thought out book. You know, I always tell people, you know, when they say, I'm like, well, yeah, sure, there's like other ones, Lost Stars and, you know, Bloodline and Lords of the Sith and all that, Tarkin. But besides the Thrawn trilogy itself, the new one, that's amazing. But I always encourage people, because those are more obvious, but I always tell people, one, read Dark Disciple, especially now, because of the Bad Batch, that's becoming
right,
more and more relevant. And it sounds like they're going to actually go into even more detail with
mhm,
Asajj Ventress. So it's like, and the part of the thing is, that's another multifaceted book, because you have Dooku playing prominently in it. You have Mace, and Mace is sort of like kind of an outlier. He's verging on the dark side. The council's a little worried about him, you know, because he's a little too obsessed. So you have that storyline. You had the Quinlan and Asajj storyline. I mean, it's just a multifaceted book. It's not. It's actually a fairly quick read. That's an incredible book. But the Thrawn Ascendancy book is just mind-blowingly good. I mean, it's. I remember reading it, going, "Wow, man, this is actually like the Thrawn trilogy is really good, but this is incredible." And yet, it
mm,
has no familiar characters other than that brief cameo. But yet, it shows that when you actually make Star Wars what it is, you don't need all the familiar characters to do that. So yeah, I mean, that's why, you know, I'm eagerly, you know, I'll probably start it this week actually, because I've been talking about it so much.
right now, y'all like
The
got
second,
yourself all
third book, I'm
jazzed up,
like,
you know.
yeah, you know, now I really need to do this, because I
Well, give you
remember,
something to read on the plane.
there you go. There were like years between. I think there's like a year or something. There was a lot of time between the first and second book, and I remember I got it And I got the third one. It just, at that time, I think it was when we were trying to read all those other ones to do the book reviews on the shows and all that. And, then things just got pushed back. And then, so I mean, it's easy to get away, but yeah, it's incredible. And I'm sure the second and third one are every bit as good. So I would definitely encourage people to, read these books, And because of that, again, that's why I'm saying, there's actually more than just the Grisk in there as far as, some of the enemies. And I'm not even talking about the internal conflict between the families of the Chiss that are vying for power. But, you had the Grisk, and you had like a couple other little things in there too. That was just really good, and then they're playing, like I remember Thrawn ended up playing like the Grisk against this other thing to try to destroy. I mean, it was really cool the way a lot of this stuff was done. So if they're trying to bring some of that in, maybe they can use the whole Ahsoka thing or whatever to launch into, hey, let's start, if they don't adapt it directly, they could start doing things like, well, let's just do a Thrawn series and make it Chiss-based. There's a lot of things they can do with it. It just depends on what they're going to do with it. That's a question.
Yeah, that is the ultimate question. Well, I guess we got to keep our eyes peeled out and, see what comes out of this. But, it's always good to speculate, always good to kind of, see where they're kind of thinking of going. And, I'm sure people, when they, as, we're having this conversation, some of our loyals like Ronaldo and hopefully Walker seems pretty knowledgeable about a lot of stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully he's joining us again. And, we can get some really cool discussions in the comments where, we can get other people's insight as far as should the Grisk kind of pop up or not. And if so, where,
Well, it's encouraging that they're in that comic. That obviously shows they're breaking the wall of canon here, that they're not just going to be relegated to this one book series. So that part's encouraging because it means, well, maybe we'll get a little bit more use of them. But it's the thing I always say, though. They got to do it correctly. They have to do it right.
Yeah.
You can't, just don't mess it up. You got a really cool thing going. And I mean, look, I know that's easier said than done. A lot of times it's easy to sit here as a fan and go, well, you should do this, you should do that. It's one thing to actually be the armchair producer. It's another thing to actually be responsible for writing and making these things. Absolutely. All I'm saying is you got a high level, talent pool of storytellers, directors, writers, and all that. Surely. It's like, look, if
billions of dollars of resources.
Right. I mean, worst case scenario, just start bringing the authors in.
Yeah.
It's,
there you go. That's what I'm
even if they can't write, because a lot of times an author can write a book, but not necessarily a screenplay. They are different disciplines.
Right.
But
absolutely, you
can still bring them in to consult. They can oversee the story part of it anyway. So that way, if you screw it up, it's a typical Lucasfilm thing, right? Poor execution.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the story was really good, but, it's that kind of thing. So, yeah, we'll just have to see. And, of course, we'll keep an eye on this. The plan is still this Friday to do our usual review at 11 o'clock. I will do... Awesome. It's going to be a little tough because, we got 2 episodes we got to review.
Mm-hmm.
Which means I got to try to find time to watch them, which I should be able to do. So, hopefully that all goes without a hitch. If all goes well, we will see you guys Friday night at 11. All right. So I think that's going to wrap it up for this. Like I said, we'll keep an eye on this Thrawn situation and any other Star Wars news that pops up. So until then, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.